As most of you are aware, for this month we had decided to occupy ourselves with the subject of myth, and as such we have come now to the second installment. The first one, in the first one last week, I primarily referred to the great American mythologist Joseph Campbell, whom I knew slightly. We had a seminar in Ojai, California once that he presided over. It was in a private house, and so about a dozen of us. And then afterwards we had more sessions in the afternoon. We had lunch in between, and so under those circumstances you get to talk to people a little bit. And I certainly haven't lost all of my admiration for him, which I have acquired by reading his material. Very, very great man, and it's a great loss that he's no longer with us. In any event, Joseph Campbell said in my hearing, and it's also in at least one of his books he wrote it, that throughout, I think the way he phrased it, throughout every civilization, every culture, there was always a major, a central myth whereby that culture lived. And we are at the present time, the modern, or what did they call it now? It's not super modern, but postmodern? Something modern, you know. Anyway, what the heck's the difference? A bunch of balderdash anyway. But anyway, let's say in our time, in our era, it would seem that the Western culture is the only culture in known history that is living without a myth. And he obviously disapproved of it considerably. He said, obviously all myths, all the stories are imperfect. There will be things there that you may not like, all that sort of thing. But on the whole, to have a whole aggregate of people live without a central mythic background in their psyches is a very bad thing. So I spoke with him about a little bit, and I agreed with him. And so I thought that this would be an opportune time for us to take a look at what we might contribute to and how we might view the emergence of a new myth for our culture, which apparently, according to, if anybody was an expert, Joe Campbell was an expert, who really knew their business, who felt that that was a very important thing. So I thought that we'll try to devote ourselves in some fashion to that. And I even came up with an idea which I don't know whether it is very meritorious or not, but if I don't get too wound up, which does happen at times, then maybe we'll attend to that a little too, or maybe next time. But I thought that we might do, we might break our usual pattern of not having any questions and things like that, and I might quit talking earlier. Let me see, when am I starting? Oh, almost 8:45. Oh, well, that'll work. That'll work. If you start late, you can take longer. But in any event, I will ask for a few people to, if they have an idea, an inspiration of some sort, as to what their desires might be regarding the nature and the content of a new myth for the future. Now, you know, there are a lot of cultures today in the world that comprise large numbers of people and cover big territories of the globe that are quite certain of having a myth. Now, they wouldn't identify it as such, but what do you suppose that the two huge mythological books of the Hindus, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, so what they are about? They are the principal myths of India. And even people who have converted to Islam or became Sikhs or whatever the various groups might be, respect those myths. In fact, that was Joseph Campbell's big interest, that he discovered the translation into German by Richard Wilhelm of a very good book on the myths, and it's called Philosophies of India. It's not a very accurate title because a myth is not a philosophy, although it may convey quite a bit of a philosophical content. In any event, I knew of Wilhelm a little bit back in Europe already. He was teaching at one of the German universities, and owing to the great, terrible catastrophe that his wife, who was also incidentally the descendant of a famous German poet, Hugo von Hofmannsthal, but she also had, believe it or not, she had a Jewish person among his ancestors. So the Nazis kicked not only her, but her husband, Professor Wilhelm, out of the university, and finally he couldn't get a job in Europe, or at least in the German-speaking countries, and he came to New York. And in New York, in turn, the New York climate gifted him, as we call nowadays, gifted him with a bad case of the flu, and he died. Absolutely brilliant man. If you want to take a look at his books, I'll repeat again, the big thick book, which looks a little bit formidable, is Philosophies of India, was translated by Joseph Campbell. And then a much smaller but also very exciting book is called The Kingdom and the Corpse, which is really a collection of several myths in smaller format, very, very good. So in any event, it was Wilhelm who I think probably called attention to Campbell to the fact that entire cultural units, entire continents and big people, now or in the past, have had one or maybe more myths as the foundation of their thinking. And that somehow, by some strange quirk of history, we don't have that anymore. Now, I need to perhaps explain a little bit. I can't explain Joseph Campbell because he gone bye-bye, you know. But I think he rests in a cemetery in Hawaii, because that's where he lived the last few years of his life. His wife, the redoubtable Jean Erdmann, who, by the way, was a very accomplished and very famous dancer. And he met Jean Erdmann, I think, at the school. He taught all his life in a girls' school and always got along very famously with the girls. And perhaps even some of the lady professors, you know. Campbell was a singularly good-looking man, even in his old age. Man, he was fabulous. In any event, so we need to keep in mind that this is, I think, a very important expert statement, and that if we can contribute to this particular conundrum of the mythlessness, the lack of myth of our culture, and maybe may suggest some remedies for it, no matter how amateurish they might be, that this would be a nice thing to do. So now once I quit introducing myself and things like that, we might get around to that, but I would like to, that was my initial idea, I would like to quit the main talk probably a little earlier than usual, and then sort of see what ideas some of you might have regarding how the mythlessness could be remedied. I somewhat feel about that. I think I mentioned that before. I often mention it in connection with Campbell because, at least in this country, he's the one who resurrected interest in mythology. There is one of the great epics in the German language by Schiller, who was the second greatest poet with Goethe, and it's called anybody here speak German? Not tonight. Oh, okay, fine. Then I got to do a bit of translating in my head, which is all right. I grew up, bilingual, Hungarian and German. We spoke both languages at home, and then I lived for about 6.5 years in Austria, and went to German language school there, including to Hungarian Hoeller. So let's say I value my German language very greatly too, and this one had to do with a certain historical incident. It's entitled the Graf von Habsburg, which means the Count of Habsburg, who was of course the great granddaddy of what became the imperial family of Austria-Hungary. And so the poem starts because he became Holy Roman Emperor, the elector princes, they would, when a Holy Roman Emperor died, then all the German elector princes would get together and elect a new emperor. So, elections of one kind have been around for quite a while. In any event, they elected this obscure Swiss nobleman as the Holy Roman Emperor, who became Rudolf I. And so this is a scene wherein he is in, I don't know, which was the coronation city for the emperors, maybe Mainz. Anyway, he's there surrounded by all the nobles and so forth, and so different people come and greet him. And one man who wears a very obscure dark clothing, I don't think he wears a mask. There was no Dr. Fauci in Germany. See, no mask. Got to wait till Halloween. Wear all the masks. Although in Germany there's probably no Halloween yet. Although I saw Halloween objects in my native city of Budapest a few years ago. The American influence was coming in, including Halloween. But that's really neither here, but it's there. You can't say it's neither here nor there because it was there. So in any event, so this obscure minstrel comes up and starts declaiming a poem. And this poem is about the Count of Habsburg, who now has become the emperor. And it starts out with, I can get away saying anything to you because you don't know German, so this is a very easy job. Nicht blind mehr waltet der eiserne Speer, nicht fürchtet der Schwache der Friedliche mehr, des Mächtigen Beute zu werden. No longer does the iron spear go about wildly neither does the weak, the peaceful, the good need to fear to become the victim of the strong and of the mighty, because the terrible, the emperor's time is over, and now we have the old government re-established again. Beautiful phrase. In any event, that is sort of what I mean, that if the emperor's time, who after all is the living myth in the Middle Ages, if the emperor's time is a terrible time, the mythless time, the time without the myth in our culture is equally or maybe more disastrous. And so to look at it in depth, and largely maybe to look at it a little bit within ourselves, where after all, ultimately all the good things come from. The cornucopia of wisdom is hidden away right inside of us, and all we need to do is just to sort of grease it a little bit with good material, speak into it, and then it gets going. In any event, it reminds me of that. Now we need to try to take a short and probably imperfect view of what kind of myths, great myths, monomyths as they are also often called, because the monomyth means the one myth that's greater than all the others. So I don't know, I would say that probably the Mahabharata, of the great Bharata war, which contains the Bhagavad Gita, is probably the monomyth of India. And of course the life of Buddha, the Dhammapada, is the monomyth of Buddhism. There are many different myths in Buddhism, especially if you get to the Tibetans and so forth, because boy, those guys had a spiritual imagination like you don't believe, But in any event, it's there. And so in many places there are these monomyths, and then maybe there are still important myths surviving that pertain to any particular country, but no longer to the culture. And so how would we treat, let's say, the Mediterranean basin, the European and Middle Eastern and North African milieu? How would we treat that in terms of myth? I would say that, but again, don't take my word for it, because I have been known to be wrong, although really very, very seldom. It would be my opinion that the myth of Western culture was a compound added or cabled together of several elements. The first big step were the polytheistic cultures of the Mediterranean area, beginning probably with the oldest, namely ancient Egypt, and from there then Greece and Rome and various other smaller countries about. And they all had the basic myth very much in common. In other words, that there are the humans and then there are the gods. The humans are here going about their business, but they know about the gods and the goddesses who have their own place, which in Egypt was called Amenta, which is also the place where the dead go. In Greece, it was called the Olympian realms. And so there they are, and that's which I always love, that little imagery that I just think Plato wrote about it a little. He said that when you walk along, Greece is full of mountains. You walk along the mountain and you hear something strange coming down from above. And if you listen very carefully, it's laughter. That is the realm of the gods. The gods laugh. The gods are the only ones in the goddesses who are able to afford to laugh about everything. That's sort of the reason behind it. I always thought it was a great and wonderful little item that the Greeks came up with, who of course were very, very wise. And so, and then of course that spreads out and takes various other forms and manifestations, even the names of the gods and the goddesses. I have a book that was given to me about a year ago. It was published quite a while back. It's by a French author. I'll bring it along sometime. I have 2 or 3 of his books. He has one of my favorite books of them all, which is the book about Alexander the Great. But he has another one, which is the genealogy of the gods. Very interesting. And he has there placed side by side on the first few pages the Roman gods and the Greek gods. So which corresponds to which? You know, like say, Zeus turns Jupiter, and so forth. Same with the goddesses. It's very interesting because you can see that so Jung's expression, there are archetypes that are manifesting there, and they may have different names in 2 different nations, but when you read what was said about them and their worship and how they would appear in various, you can see that they are very closely, the pairs are very closely related to each other. So let's say there was a predominantly polytheistic myth, which has its stories. I mean, the myths of the great writers, Homer and Odysseus. Odysseus is the subject of the myth and so forth, are all there. But they all really tell the same story. So much so that, let's say, like in America, we can talk about the ships from across the sea, and Columbus and various people coming here, and so on, and that in Rome, they spoke of the warriors of Troy, who ran afoul the goddess Juno, and then she chased them out of the Peloponnesus, and they had to get on the ships and go. And so they arrived in Italy. In the famous great poem of Horatius about them, I had 8 years of Latin, but I also led a long life since then. So I had a lot of time. I had some time to learn, and then I had a lot of time to forget, which is the way things go. I'm trying to recall the Latin. Arma virumque canoque primus arboris toiam voniusque laviniaque. I sing of the weapons and the warriors who, being driven by the anger of the goddess Juno, came to Lavinia, which is one of the ancient names for Italy. So he describes how this, and there is definitely an ethnic long-time relationship between the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, there's no doubt about it. And so then a mythology developed in Rome, which, although it has different names, but in all its major features and in the major stories is identical with the Greek. And if you ever come across that book, it's interesting to see the close parallels. And of course, there are many centuries between the two. But you can sort of ask yourself, well, look, if you look at the map, Greece and Rome are not all that close together, especially when you don't have airplanes and helicopters and other fast-moving vehicles, and yet their essential content is so similar. So why is that? Well, first of all, there is obviously an ethnic relationship between the two ancient peoples, but also I feel from a deeper point of view, which would be, I think, greatly justified by depth psychology, that under certain conditions, people can tune in to realities, whereas the Greeks and the Romans would tell you where the gods are, and where the goddesses are. If you in your mind, if you get there, then you're there. And then you can report about it. And it's really quite logical if you get away from the materialistic hypothesis that the gods or the angels and all these strange spectral creatures, that they don't exist. If they didn't exist, then why did so many people write about them? If they didn't exist, why do so many people believe in them today? And that there have been so many often amazing apparitions of these supernatural beings that the ancients called the gods and the goddesses. And the wise men in antiquity even recognized the overlap. For instance, I think it is Plato, not Aristotle, who wrote that all the goddesses in the world, the Greek goddesses, Roman goddesses, that all the goddesses are really aspects of one goddess, who is Isis. Because she was the oldest, and she's sort of the archetypal mother of all the feminine deities. And held in very great esteem by Egyptians, by Romans, by Greeks, and as such, it's important to keep in mind, because even in a much later period, when Rome was, I think Rome had occupied Egypt by then, when Apuleius wrote his book Metamorphosis, which is often translated as the golden ass, by which they mean the golden donkey, not a portion of the human anatomy, thank God. And the reason is it's the first short novel in the history of literature, as far as we know, and it's really very exciting. Whatever turns you on, you'll probably find in Apuleius, because he writes quite a bit of the sexy stories and things like that too, and that all comes about because some magician changed him into a donkey. So here he is, a pretty asinine thing to do. But anyway, here he is, he's the donkey. When he gets around, he wanders around here, he goes into houses, he goes into people's farms, he gets on the ships and everything. He's a very active donkey. And people don't guard their actions and their words as much in the presence of a donkey as they would of a human. And therefore he gets to see and to witness all kinds of strange things. And many of them are pretty sexual in nature. But to the Romans that was funny. To the Romans, this is part of the Roman mind. To the Romans, sex is something funny. You laugh about it, that's it. Well, I suppose it's better to laugh about it than to cry about it. But in any event, there is a lot of that there. And see the poor donkeys wandering around and seeing all these weird things that humans do and say to each other and do to each other and all of that. And then somehow he is advised that he could be made to change back to a human. But he would have to go to a particular spot on the shore of the ocean and be there when the moon is in a particular configuration and so forth, and look out on the ocean, and then the magic would happen and he would change back to a human. So he was a smart one of the smarter donkeys around. So he goes out to the ocean and he's there, and I'm pretty sure that that comes just a few minutes later. So he's out there looking at the moonlit sea, and out of the sea there emerges something that comes toward him, and it is the goddess Isis. And he prays to Isis, and Isis takes a big garland of roses and hangs it around the donkey's neck. And with that act, by the midnight sun, as they say, the midnight sun begins to shine, and Apuleius is Apuleius again, and not a mere long-haired donkey. And he thanks Isis and prays to Isis, and so she changed him back to a human. Again, I mean, gives you a little idea. I mean, this is a mini myth, because it's just a particular episode in this poet's life. But even in the mini myth, you can see that we all, perhaps, or most of us, I don't want to be accusatory to anybody, most of us have been changed when we came from the Empyrean, the world of the gods, to this world. And we have changed into something that in certain ways is inferior. Now you might say that what's so inferior about donkey? And I could tell you, because I owned 2 of them when I was a child, and I loved my donkeys, and I always will. And I have found them being exposed to the donkeys a lot, that they're really doggone smart. When you have been around for a donkey a long time, you can tell when they are thinking. And they get these wrinkles on their forehead, and their ears are moving around. Now he's trying to figure out something. And they usually do. They're incredible. So in any event, I mean, certainly not the idea of the asinine, the stupid donkey, but quite the contrary. But the thing is, and so maybe we are also sort of, somebody actually had a word for it. I think that we are wise animals, smart animals. And that's probably a fairly good description, because we definitely wear an animal body, but our intelligence or ability of consciousness and so forth is different. And so it is along these lines that we have to look for the whole mythic structure, let's say in this case of the Mediterranean region. There's absolute belief that there are supernatural beings, gods and goddesses, and there are lesser ones, nymphs and fauns and all of that. They are sort of the small fry, of the spirit world. But that they are there, and that under certain conditions, when certain conditions are met, humans can actually change into gods. That is known as apotheosis or theosis, the becoming God. And you know, in the Greek Orthodox Church, for instance, the Ascension of Jesus Christ at the Feast of the Ascension is called his apotheosis. That is when he recovers his full divinity and rises up to his Father, whose Father's Day is actually coming in our secular holiday. But in any event, let us say let's see, I think Geoffrey Hodgson, our theosophical seer, God bless his soul, I I sometimes wonder when I come in here and that if I go into the office that Mr. Hodgson will be sitting there at the desk again. Because that's where I first met him. Very interesting man, very kind and very lovely and very wise man. In any event, and he told me things that I was in grave danger of falling down, and we didn't have as good a carpet there as we do now, so I didn't want to fall on the hard floor. But anyway, Mr. Hodgson knew a great deal. In any event, he wrote one book among many others, but he wrote one that is called The Kingdom of the Gods. And if you look at these stained glass windows, these are all pictures that have been copied out of pictures in the Kingdom of the Gods. What he also uses the term intermittently between angels and gods, the whole kingdom of nature. And let's see. I think around the middle of it there is a mountain and a being rising from the mountain, and we asked him who that was. With all my accomplishments in my old age, I still don't have eyes in the back of my head, so I can't see what's back there. In any event, he indicated that is a mountain god, as he called him, in the state of Nepal in South Africa. Yeah. And so he saw these, he was a clairvoyant, he saw all of these, and then he made sketches and things, and we had a very fine artist lady here. She was actually a pain in the neck to deal with in other ways, but that needs not be brought up. So why did I bring it up? I don't know. In any event, she made some very good paintings. There were the reproductions on the basis of Mr. Hodgson's description. And these then went into the book, The Kingdom of the Gods. And then Mr. Hodgson was no longer around, and hardly anybody else, but you know what? I was around. Then came a German gentleman who was a fine and world-renowned stained glass maker. And he said, "Can I do something for you?" So we negotiated with him. He was working for quite good stained glass, whatever they call it, stained glass factory, stained glass laboratory, stained glass studio in Pasadena. The name will come to me in a minute. And but he was still doing some little work on his own. And so we showed him the Hodgson pictures, and then he made this whole wall of stained glass, as well as, let's see, 1, 2, 3 other big windows. They're all stained glass, and they're all taken from the Hodgson pictures. Now, why did I bring that up? Well, I probably brought it up because it indicates that even on, let's say, in this day and age, so far away from the ancient gods of Rome and Greece and Egypt, there are still people who have a sense of these beings. And these beings, see, that's one thing that you got to believe the Greeks and the Romans. What did they say? They said, the gods never die. They are the immortals. Humans die, but the gods don't. And that is when a human changes into a god or goddess, then the chances are that they will move into another kingdom, a kingdom of immortality. And now they can be dealt with, so to say, on a different level, which I think is quite true. That is is a possible reason why some famous people, especially very godly people, great saints and so forth, in East and West, in the Middle East and so forth, when they appear, sometimes a century later or so forth, they're still there. Somebody is at home, because they have moved. I think the Greeks actually said that there are sort of 3 stages. First, if you're a very good and very brave Greek, then you first become a hero. And secondly, you become a demigod or demigoddess, and then you become a full-fledged god or goddess. So there is, when people apply themselves, there is, you might say, there is a way of advancing our status as spiritual beings, but we have to work at it. And of course, the Greeks and the Romans too, being a culture that revered warfare, they would have that a person has to exhibit a heroic virtue, has to become a hero, or a heroine, which is just an inform. Not that kind of heroine. And when you are, then you are on your way. It takes heroism to be a really good person. It takes heroism to be a really wise person. It doesn't take hardly anything to be a dumbbell. Or as in German we call it a Dummkopf, which is a very expressive term. It means a stupid head. You know. Oh, I love some of those German expressions. In any event, if, let's say, honest and purposeful striving for the greater brings results, and moves you from a mainly or purely material level to a transcendental level, and that's how gods and goddesses are being made. Now then, all right, pretty much the main features of this cosmology are also present in Rome, and even more so, and in a more somber and powerful archetypal way in ancient Egypt, which means that humans, if very well intentioned and very accomplished, can become gods or goddesses. That there is something beyond where we are, but we have to get there. And to get there, we have to work at it. It's not just that we sit down and have a nice big pipe of some strong weed, and then we turn into gods and goddesses. You know? If it were that easy, then we would be living in a universe of gods, you know. But it's not that easy. However, in any event, so that is the main feature, the polytheistic faiths having a great deal in common, and even recognizing in a strange fashion the gods and some of the gods and the goddesses of each other as being having a deep affinity with, maybe an identity with their own. So that Venus is an aspect of Isis in that respect. So why? Because they had a sense to look beyond the appearance, just beyond when the gods appear and what form they were and so forth, and that appearance then joins them in something that in modern terms we have come to call archetypes, ancient types, ancient images, which brings me also to something else that it shouldn't, because I've been jumping around, and that is the issue of it was C.G. Jung who came up with this, and I think in a very valid fashion, of archetypal images. That there are archetypes and there are images which exist in the in the human soul, in the human psyche. And if you do certain things that you get close to them, then you become aware of them, and perhaps can carry on conversations with them, see them in visions and things like that. And so these are the features that are really identical. Egypt, Greece, Rome. And now you say, well, what about the Celts up north, and all that? Also very similar, but maybe within a different milieu. Because these were, well, the Greeks were seafaring people, and so were the Romans, and had arts and beautiful buildings and things like that. The people in the forests in the oak forests of Germany, the old dumpy proto-Germans, with the big wooden cudgels and things like that. And the Celts a little bit too. I mean, they were on a different strain. They were not the same as the Mediterranean people. But they were there also. And they also recognized many gods and many goddesses. Okay, so that was the first myth. The myth of the gods and their relationship to the world and to the humans. But then we all know more or less what happened. Meanwhile, sort of in behind the cracks of history, there arose another orientation which in certain respects was very different from the old one. But in other respects, if we really look at it deeply, is not all that different. But once again, what you see depends on the viewer. If you know, then you will see the right thing. If you don't know, you will see the wrong thing. This is the old idea of gnosis. But let us say what I'm talking about is that now there arose slowly a few religions in the ancient Mediterranean who were tired of all the gods and the goddesses and their antics and their chasing around and so forth, and who decided that they wanted one God. And probably the oldest one of these, even though if you tell that to a rabbi, he's going to hit you, were not the Jews, but the Persians, the Iranians. And the Persians were polytheists, just like all the rest of them. In fact, their gods, the ancient Persians, Iranians, spoke a language very similar to Sanskrit. And in their language, so they refer to the gods just like the Hindus do as the devas, the shining ones. So then, however, somehow some archetypal change, and there came a prophet whose name was Zarathustra, quite a long time ago. We're going thousands of years. And Zarathustra proclaimed that there is only one God, Ahura Mazda, and there are the old gods are no good, so to say. He was probably the first monotheist, although we can never be sure, because there have been phenomena on the face of the earth that have not been recorded. But anyway, this was the beginning of the great religion of Zoroastrianism. And later on, as this often happens, I will make no reference to current world events, but you know what? And then came the Muslims. And the Muslims said to the Zoroastrians, you either convert or, of course, you're hid. Or some other part of your body, depending on the situation. So in any event, let's say, from the beginning, the followers of the prophet were were very inclined to convert people by force, shall we say. And so then a large number of the Zoroastrians who were in Persia packed up and moved to India. Somebody must have, there was a lot of going back and forth, and probably some messenger came to them and said, hey, you go to India, you can believe in any god or goddess that you will, it's full of gods, nobody's going to bother you there. Come. And so they went off to India, and they're still there. And they are called the Parsis, which just means Persians. And very interesting people also. Their sacred element is the fire. And anyway, I don't want to go into personal experiences, but let's say a Zoroastrian fire ceremony is an interesting thing to see. They have this great pit of fire, usually on elevated altars on the fire, and then the priest is chanting the Avestic hymns and throwing in these, like a stage magician, throwing in these powders, and one of them he throws in and the flames come up white, and throws in another one and they come up red and blue and red. Meanwhile he's chanting these really very sonorous, beautiful ancient Persian. Right? So in any event, it's a very cultivated, very beautiful religion, have very good pictures. In India, they are very highly respected and have their own temples and all that sort of thing. The Parsis. All right, this is probably, in all likelihood, the first monotheistic faith. And then, so the rabbis are not going to get mad at us. Then, of course, come the Jews. And a prophetic religion. So was Zarathustra is always called the prophet Zarathustra, the Lord Zarathustra. In any event, the prophetic religion, which means that out of the general populace, there develop some people who, they know more than the other people. They have a contact with the transcendental realms, and therefore they bring messages, they bring imagery, they bring commandments, all that sort of thing from the realms that are ordinarily invisible to people. And one of these people, really at that time very inconsequential Semitic tribes, were the Jews, the people of Israel, with their 12 tribes and so forth. And they had a plethora of prophets. Well, if you look in the Old Testament, the 12 minor prophets and the how many? 5 major prophets. I mean, they're just prophet. So these prophets were disclosing things. Just like the old shamans, whether they're in the jungle or the prairie or so, they have contact with supernatural beings, and if they have a good memory, they come down and they tell people about it. And that is the beginning of prophetic religiosity. But it has, so the scholars say, but it has shamanistic origin, let's say. In any event, here was another people who at one time, I mean, they were big wanderers, the Jews. They went from one place to another, and it's really true that large numbers of them for a long time lived in Egypt. So the Exodus myth is not, it's a myth, but it is a good myth. And that has all kinds of ways in which it can be internalized. In any event, then eventually they found a new place. And that's the place that now all the fighting and the demonstrating, I don't look like it, I don't speak like it, but I'm really from Mississippi, you hear, so I'm demonstrating. And I was very friendly with a lot of people there. But in any event, so, and the demonstrating and all of that is of course a much, much later development. But these were the people who, heaven knows exactly where they started, but they had these prophets, shamanistic prophets, and they would tell them, no, you do this, you do that, don't do this, don't do that, including don't eat pork, which I always consider to be a regrettable loss, because we Hungarians really like our pork. But that's really a separate culinary matter. But let us say, and then there is the story. Obviously, a myth is a story. So it need not be taken literally, but it needs to be taken seriously. That's two different ways of going. And this is the story of one of the important old prophets of Israel, Jacob. And Jacob, I don't know, I'm not that great a scholar of Old Testament, because I always liked the New Testament better. I can't help it. I was a natural-born Christian. And then I became a Gnostic Christian anyway. But let's say there was this old, aging Jewish fellow, Jacob, and he was looking for a place to move to. Probably the rent got too high wherever he was, So he went out and was wandering, and he came to a strange, desolate place, but it felt strange. And most of you probably have that kind of a sense that there are some places that are strange. Some places are holy, some places are maybe unholy, but they're all strange. When you get there, what the heck's going on? It's a different thing. So he comes to a place like that and begins to feel weird. So he goes around, and he doesn't see anything unusual. So he's tired like a dog. So he decides to go to sleep. So he can't find even a bush that is, not terribly hard to put his head on when he's going to sleep. But I said, oh, well, that's all right. So he finds a couple of stones, puts them under his head, lies down and sleeps. And that's not the important part. The important part is that he dreams something. And what he dreams is about the French call an escalier. And this is the escalier des anges, the stairway of the angels. He sees this great stairway going up and coming down, and on it both going up and coming down are angels upon angels upon angels. And he's mightily impressed. And once again, my knowledge of Old Testament law is not that great, but in some ways, I don't even know whether they talk to him, but in some ways the angels convey to him the message that this is a very good place, a very holy place, and that this would be a real good place for him and his people to come and live. And he soaks all that in, he thanks the angels, picks up his walking stick and goes back to wherever the rest of the Jews were living, probably in some corner of Egypt, and brings his family and his extended family all to the place. And because he's told various things where he's there, that this is the place where the Lord lives. This is where you have to come. So he's really ordered to come there. All right, so if you hear various things and demonstrations and things you do, when was the state of Israel founded and by whom? It was founded by the angels through the patriarch Jacob. Because that is the beginning. I often used that passage from the Bible in the past when I was speaking about dreams. When I would say, you know that there is a country in very famous country in its way that was founded by a dream, the dream of Jacob. He dreamt of the angels going up, of the angels coming down. So that is in the myth, that is the myth of the beginning of the land of Israel. And then, of course, all kinds of other things go on. I mean, it's a wild story, and among them they get captured by the Egyptians, and then you have the whole Egyptian slavery bit. But they always had an idea, apparently, in their head, you know, there is a place that old Jacob used to talk about, and it's supposed to be a really nice place. And we got to get the heck away from Egypt and go up there. And see, they're still going Gaza and this and that, and you still have all this wandering back and forth. So then they get a new prophet, Moses, and they pack up, and apparently on a very long and arduous journey, they find their way to the place of Jacob. And that is, according to the myth, that is the place of the land of Israel, subsequently mainly defended by the tribe of Judah, for which reason it came to be called Judea. You see, the land of the Jews. You know what? I'm not going to go any further. But read your Bible, read your ancient history. You're not going to find much reference there to Philistines, except the ones that were fighting with the Jews and were, you know, who was the one who beat the Philistines?
David.
Yes. So he was on the
Goliath.
Yeah. There was and there was the island song. What's his name again? The Philippine beater, big one. And Samson, for heaven's sakes, yeah. So Samson was an old man. Yeah. He beat the Philistines, as we all know. See, he met Delilah on top of the bed, and she told him all his strength was in the hair of his head. See, I could be the new calypso singer if I had any voice, if I knew enough calypso. But in any event, you know, there are some references that there were some strange people around there from time to time that the people of Judea were fighting with, and that they were called the Philistines. Now, a modification of the word Philistine is Palestine. That's where it comes from. So, how did the Jews apparently beat the Philistines with Samson, but there were still some Philistines around. So what was kind of interesting about the whole situation, that the country there was never called Palestine until the Romans. And the Romans, you know, were tough cookies. And for one thing, the Jews really got under their skin. Because every other week or every other month they started another uprising when the Romans occupied the Holy Land. And the Romans really got tired of that. They said, the heck with the Jews, like some people say now. And so the Emperor Vespasian, who was the first great emperor after the original dynasty of Augustus, Vespasian had a son named Titus, who was a great general. and really knew how to organize warfare. So Titus came and he really beat the heck out of the Jews. I think it was the last big defeat until a while ago. And then he reorganized everything and told the Jews that they have to move. So I think that some of these Palestinian demonstrators now, maybe if they read everything, they read some of the Old Testament. Oh yeah, well, Titus was able to kick out the Jews, so maybe we can also. But in any event, then he said, well, we are going to call this country Palestina. That goes back to the subsequently emperor, by that time only General Titus. So just a little bit of historical things to titillate us have really nothing to do hardly with anything, at least in my opinion, but I thought I'd tell them just the same. So in any event, there in that place, for a very, very long time, it would be hard to calculate because then there is Babylonian captivity, there is this, there is that, there is Egyptian captivity. I mean, people like to come and take the poor Jews captive. In any event, finally, then under Titus, they were expelled. And that was the beginning of the diaspora, as it is called, means the scattering out, because the people fled. And as it happens with refugees, I was one myself, you go where they will have you. You better not go where they won't have you, because more likely they'll kill you. So, in any event, then it became, but there were still some people from the old Judea who were there. And the temple was built and rebuilt again, and depending on who the overall rulers were, whether it was Alexander the Great or whether it was the Romans, but they kept rebuilding Jerusalem and so forth. So it was always there, but it was always pretty poor pickings. I don't think until the modern times, until the founding of the State of Israel in modern times, it was not a very good agricultural country. You couldn't grow things there too well. The goats would die and all kinds of things. It wasn't a heck of a good place to go to. And that's about all there is to it. And then, of course, history rolls on and all that. But remember, somebody asked you, when was the State of Israel founded? When was Judea founded? It was founded with Jacob when he saw the angels coming and going. And when they told him that, okay, Jack, this is the place. That's I'm translating angelic language, So in any event, now, there, beginning with the Persians, at least I think they were first, and you better not tell a Parsi that they were not the first monotheistic religion. They'll really be angry with you. We were first. Well, right. So in any event, the Persians were the first monotheists, the Jews were the second. And then sort of eventually out of the Judaism of the time, they sort of developed heresies, little groups that didn't agree with the temple priests in Jerusalem and so forth. And some of those were the people who had a leader by the name of Joshua, which incidentally is also the name of the man who led the Jews into Palestine, Joshua, son of Nun, and then there were, in other words, things, and the Samaritans, and some others that have been forgotten about. So there were the main group of Judaism and the smaller group, but they all revered the one God, because they had the tradition that the one God, who undoubtedly has many angels, he has many prophets, he has all kinds of a crew in heaven, but he is the one. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. And that has remained, to the present time. So it was really the great repository, other than the Persians, who had to even move from their own original country, of the monotheistic religion. So now they're developed, over the years, they've developed a strange, strange hybrid culture. A culture that still had a certain regard for the gods. Especially, they were right close to Babylonian gods, Persian, various others, and they had very interesting religions, like really beautiful priestesses who would, if you came there to pray, and they would go to bed with you. I mean, can you beat it? And things like so. There were all kinds of rivals there, but they were the mainstay of monotheism. And out of this monotheism, now developed a new thing. And that new thing eventually came to be known as Christianity. It consisted of the followers of a new prophet at that time, who was regarded by many of the people not only as a prophet, but as a Mashiach, as it's called in Hebrew, a Messiah. And so something new, even new to the Jews, that came forth. And then from this, they developed Christianity. And that has had many divisions and many opinions and many scriptures and many gospels and all kinds of things. And slowly, also being pushed around by various governments, like the Emperor Constantine of the Romans and others, it developed into a real establishment religion for a period of time of the Roman Empire, and eventually Constantinople, Constantine's new city, named after Constantine and so forth, and it kept on going. So now there came a new culture, and curiously enough, the rising of this new culture. We mentioned the astrological factors, a little bit of the zodiacal ages last time. The astrological factor also was to the effect that when this new Christian religion started, this was the beginning of the Piscean zodiacal age. The zodiacal age lasts about 2,500 years. And they go sort of backward in the zodiac. So a new age started. The new age was not invented in San Francisco in the 1960s. The new age was invented over there in Judea by the people who were watching the stars, and maybe the people who then were immortalized as the three kings, In any event, so now came about a new culture. And I cannot tell you for what reason, but there are two things that come to my mind. One is that, there are some things in life of the individual, or of a nation, or of a world that are meant to happen. Now you can say, okay, it is God's will, or it is the will of all the gods, or of none, but there are some things that are ordained to happen. History wouldn't have gone on otherwise. And what was that? It was the rise of the Christian religion to ultimately a world faith and a most important cultural factor that saturated eventually everything from Australia to Iceland and the other way around to the end of Siberia. It was everywhere, and for a long, long time. And now, when, according to the astrologers, that Piscean age is coming to an end, or maybe has to come to an end again, no doubt the thoughts of some people who know of all this weird stuff say, well, okay, now what's going to happen now?
Aquarius.
Excuse me?
Aquarius.
Yeah, Aquarius, the age of Aquarius. Yeah. But let's say, other than the knowing something about the traditionally held characteristics of Aquarian people, we really know very little as to what that age of Aquarius came about. I know we had even a theater down here on Sunset Boulevard, the Aquarius Theater, and all kinds of weird dances and songs and everything else, but we still don't know that much. The only one which I mentioned actually last time at the end of the talk, where there is actually a real definite prophecy that has been made and that is respected quite a number of people, that came from all people the great psychologist C.G. Jung, and is contained in his long-time secret book, The Red Book. And in it, in a somewhat veiled and not very clear fashion, Jung says that when the Aquarian age comes, that there would be and I enumerated them last time, that the way it would come is war, magic, and religion. That these would be the three keynotes whereby it came. Now, of course, what the old Swiss gentleman with his good pipe, he always smoked a good tobacco, he could afford it, what the old gentleman, what he really meant with war, what he really meant with magic, even more, that's difficult to define. Yes?
Was he smoking tobacco or he had magic mushrooms on his?
Well, look, let's put it this way. If I claimed first-hand knowledge of that, then I would be lying. So I really don't know. But he had an interest in psychedelics, but I don't think that the mushroom, even though they probably grow like crazy in the mountains in Switzerland, I don't think that mushroom was his favorite. Because, let's say, did the prophets of the Old Testament, did Zarathustra and these people, did they have mushrooms? Probably not. And from all my research, I would say that the Amanita muscaria and the other magic mushrooms, they are rather poor medicine. They are weird. Let me put it that way. If I'm going to have my mind altered, I'd rather do it with something else than a doggone toadstool. But on the other hand, if you like to do that sort of thing, go right ahead. In any event, so a big culture, a culture that lasted, it would seem, the entire zodiacal age, the Piscean age, has happened, caused tremendous changes the world over, and now calendarically is coming to an end. So I would say it couldn't help to look at the Red Book, and I'll bring another copy of it next time, wherein he indicates even a possible time scale as to how this happened, and so that the new aeon, as he calls it, which is good ancient Greek, that the good aeon is divided into 3 levels, and the first one of those is war. And he just says, it's actually one of the shortest of the chapters in the Red Book. And he just says in so many words, well, you know, we all know what war is. It was written after World War I, and maybe it continued during World War II. So we know what war is. We don't have to write about that. But then the next one is more magic. He writes a little bit about it, but I have my own notions of what magic is, and Dr. Jung has his own. I don't think they're so terribly far apart, but let's say, just bring back what I often say, I bring back that magic has to do with the magnifying, with the becoming more full and more great of the soul. My soul does magnify the Lord, as the Virgin Mary says in the Bible. So that is the magic. When the little soul, in that case, you know, symbolically, the little Jewish lady sitting in a hut somewhere, and she says, I am going to be the mother of the Messiah. And the angel is there, yes, that's what you have to do. There you are. Whether there are any mushrooms involved or not, I don't know. If it was, more power to her and more power to the mushrooms. You know, there was a guy named John Allegro, curious name, Italian name. John Allegro was a university professor, and he was a big shot with the Dead Sea Scrolls and all of that. And he went off on a big tangent, and perhaps he was right, that that's what early Christianity was all about, was eating mushrooms. Well, okay, Professor, if it makes you happy, if it made them happy, go right ahead. But let us say those were the beginnings of the Christian culture, and then depending on all sorts of historical factors, I mean, we all have learned some of our world history, then came, of course, the long 2,500 years of the Piscean Age. Now, apparently, one way or the other, whether you are an astrologer or whether you are a follower of Carl Jung, that age is coming to an end. And as Joseph Campbell indicated, all right, folks, now what? In other words, how and in what fashion is the new aeon, the new age going to develop? What can we contribute to it? How can we advance such aspects of it that we consider to be good, and maybe cut down on the ones that we consider not so good? In any way, I don't know what happened to my big book. Here, it's here. I will bring it out again. Here, for those of you who were not here last time, there is a wonderful mandala-shaped diagram, among others, that was drawn by C.G. Jung, which indicates the coming and even the name of the new God. And we will photograph, because I think this is the best photographic picture of that I have seen. There is a little bitty one in the Red Book itself, in the appendix, but it's nowhere as detailed and beautifully colorful as this one. So when we can do that, we will, and then we'll be able to project it and all of that, because it sort of shows the old, what would have been the deities and the powers in the old aeon, like Abraxas, and many others, very, very beautifully done. And it's that to understand it, you might take my book, the Gnostic Jung and the 7 Sermons to the Dead, where I have the 7 sermons to which that diagram is primarily an illustration, because I had access to the written part, and you understand it better when you see all these pictures, even though they are weird images. God have mercy. So let's say seems. All the such evidence as we have indicates that we are at the threshold of new developments. And that these new developments would be, at least in part, as they always have been in the past, would be in part of a spiritual, religious nature. And that being the case, I think it would be advantageous to us if we advance that, and if we were able to facilitate, let's say in our own little way, the coming forth of this new kind of gnosis. About the only thing I can say, because Jung had written some other things, if any of you, that is really cheap. If you want to read something interesting and really cheap, but without the illustrations, then get a copy of the, what is it called, the Traveler's Edition of the Red Book. And there is a portion that was put there by Dr. Shamdasani, the editor, from some other writings of Jung, where Jung describes the names that he gives to the new God. And you know, there are hundreds. There is no religious scripture that I have seen, and I mean, I have seen many, but not all, where there is such a plethora of beautiful praising names of a Godhead as for the new God of the new Aeon that Shamdasani put in that particular edition. And you can see that, I mean, this was an experience to Jung. Jung knew what he was talking about. He was an honest man, he was a man with a tremendous imagination, and he did have an encounter, shall we say, with the new God. And he intimated, if you read through the Red Book, he intimated that we all have an acquaintance with him. Why? Because an aspect of that new God is inside of us already. And if we look that way, I don't mean you should engage in aeon-long naval contemplation, but you know, if we have some contact with it, then we might have an idea as to what Jung was talking about. But how such a transcendental, incredible, deific being could come out in our age with the messes, with the miseries, with the wars, with the revolutions, with all of this balderdash that's going on, let me tell you, that's more than I can imagine, and have a pretty damn good imagination. So, yet, I trust Carl Jung probably more than anyone else in modern times. And maybe by next week, I'll have some, and also at our book club, I found among my tons of paper some of the notes that I made on my studies of Blavatsky, and where Blavatsky speaks of the coming of this new Aeon. And it's not all that much different from the things that Jung says. So let's say there is a convergence of prophetic imagination. And give or take a few decades and this and that, it's more or less supposed to be happening now. Now, does it look like that to you? It sure don't look like that to me. I think that we're in one of the most chaotic, the most weird and miserable eras of history that we know. But sometimes in the past history, great events and great ages have developed just out of this kind of confusion. And the alchemist said that long before the philosopher's stone develops in the alchemical retort, there is a stage, the original, I think it's even before the black stage, which is the massa confusa in Latin. So, maybe there is hope for us, maybe something interesting is going to come out of the confusion. And inasmuch as we don't have that much of a choice anyway, what else are we going to do? Are we going to get into a time machine and project ourselves to an earlier period of history? With my luck, I probably would end up in Paris during the reign of terror in front of the guillotine. Well, my ancestors have, why not me? So let's say, let's stay where we are, but also let's use what some people have called our noodle, voila. Let's use our consciousness and develop it and look further, and maybe we will achieve a vision. After all, look at that. This is 4 or 5 major and 12 minor prophets in the Old Testament. All these old Jewish guys, they all became prophets. But you know what? We may be Jewish guys and may not be, but we can be prophets too. If we address ourselves to the deeper aspects of the psyche, if we cultivate our imagination, we might. Now, as to what the emerging myth would be, you must admit that the Christian myth has done probably more than any other myth that we know of in history in terms of changing the world. Now, that it was never perfect, that there were inquisitions, that there were crusades, which incidentally and sometimes wish at the present time that we could have a crusade for the Holy Land. We could just bring the Templar flag and the Order of St. John and come marching in. Listen, you guys, if you don't quit fighting and you don't quit killing yourself, you know what? We'll kill you. It usually works. In any event, I don't compose it very seriously, especially because I don't have the kind of influence where I could persuade anybody to do that in this day and age. But you have to remember that the great heroic myths of a certain period of the Middle Ages were the Crusades, and all kinds of strange things have come out of it. I know families, in fact, some relatives of mine, who were actually also the relatives of Madame Blavatsky, who were there at the Crusade, night at the Crusade, and this German knight, Hahn, which means rooster, but I don't think he had that name yet, and he was walking around, he couldn't sleep, and the rooster was crowing and waking him up all the time. So she started walking around, and she saw the Saracens, the enemies, creeping in over the borders of the camp, coming in. So he made the buglers sound the trumpet and everything else, and they fought the enemy off. And he received the name of von Hahn, he of the rooster. And Madame Blavatsky's father, Colonel at the end of his life, General Peter Alexeyevich von Hahn, was a direct descendant. And there are 3 or 4 branches of the Hahn family. And the girl cousin of mine, or daughter of one of my mother's sisters, has married a Hahn about 15 years ago back in Europe. So the Hahns are still around, and they're still crowing probably. In any event, let's say that is also an archetypal event of all those people for hundreds and hundreds of years trying to go to the Holy Land, trying to go to Jerusalem. And the other one, I'll finish with that one. What about the Jewish people who for more than 2,000 years, every New Year's Day, would get together, maybe over a little glass of Slivovitz, and say, next year in Jerusalem. And you know what? I don't begrudge them. And I never will. But in any event, these are all, the thing is, Gerald Heard, the great British philosopher who died here in America, Gerald Heard wrote a book, Is God in History? It was also quite interesting. So when you read your history and you read between the pages very often, you see that some really unusual and miraculous events, strange things that ordinarily don't happen, have occurred. And in the long run, they produce significant developments. Who says that they can't occur now? Of course they can. They could occur then, and they can occur now, and they can occur tomorrow. And if we are prepared to deal with them, then maybe we are going to come out on the good end of the tunnel. We have come out on the bad end so many times that I'm really tired of it, and I rather would come out the good end.